My stepsister ruined my engagement with DNA proof, but when I discovered my fiancé lied to me for years about his secret son, I canceled the wedding and she lost $90,000, custody, and her freedom. I'm 27 years old. I work in digital marketing, and 6 months ago, my entire life exploded into pieces during what was supposed to be the happiest day of my existence. You know those stories you see on Reddit and think, no way, this has to be fake? Well, this is my story. And believe me, I wish it were made up because reality was 1,000 times worse than anyone could imagine. I guess I should start at the beginning, or at least where all of this started to make sense in retrospect, which was when my mom married my stepdad like 15 years ago and Tiffany came into my life. Tiffany is, or was, my stepsister, 5 years older than me, and from day one we had a complicated relationship. It's not that we hated each other exactly, but we weren't close either. You know what I mean? She was already like 17 when our parents got married. I was barely 12, so we never had that connection of sisters who grow up together. But the thing with Tiffany is that she was always, and when I say always, I mean always, involved in some kind of drama. Like, the woman couldn't go 6 months without some monumental crisis that made her the center of attention for the whole family. She got married super young to Peter. I think she was like 23, and they had Carter when she was 27, and from the beginning that marriage was a disaster. I was in college at the time, trying to get my life together, and I only heard the gossip secondhand at family dinners. You know, Peter this, Tiffany that, basically a constant soap opera. What I didn't know at the time, because literally nobody knew, was that Tiffany was living a double life that would make telenovelas look boring. She and Peter got divorced when Carter was like 2. And of course, Peter ended up paying child support, which made sense because we all assumed Carter was his son. But it turns out, and I found this out much later in a way I'll never forget, Tiffany had been cheating on Peter for years. Not with one, but with multiple guys. And she basically didn't even know who Carter's father was. I mean, this woman's audacity has no limits, seriously. Fast forward like 4 years after Tiffany's divorce. I was 25 and I met Zachary at a work conference. He was 28, worked in finance, and honestly, it was love at first sight for me. He was handsome, intelligent, had his life together, and most importantly, he seemed to be a genuinely good person. We started dating and everything was perfect, like those relationships you see in movies where everything flows naturally and there's no drama. Within 6 months, we were already living together, and I was convinced he was the love of my life. I introduced him to my family at a dinner, and it was a bit weird because Tiffany was there with Carter, who at the time was like 3 years old, and she was super cold to Zachary. Like, she didn't even greet him properly, just looked at him strangely and left early saying Carter was tired. My mom commented that Tiffany had been acting weird lately, but honestly, I didn't give it much thought because, again, Tiffany was always acting weird. The next 2 years were the best of my life. Zachary and I built a life together. We adopted a cat. His name was Muffin. Irrelevant detail, but I loved him. We bought furniture for our apartment. We planned vacations. All that stable couple stuff that makes you feel like a real adult. And then, like 8 months ago, Zachary proposed to me at a fancy restaurant overlooking the city, with a ring and the whole show. And obviously I said yes because I was super excited. I called my mom crying with happiness, posted photos on Instagram, did everything you're supposed to do when you get engaged. And we decided to have an engagement party 2 months later. Nothing super elaborate, but something nice with family and close friends, like 50 people. This is where everything went to hell. I sent out the invitations like a month and a half before, and of course I invited Tiffany because, even though they weren't super close, she was still my stepsister, and I thought it would be weird not to invite her. She responded that she couldn't come because she had plans with Carter that weekend. And honestly, I was a bit relieved because family gatherings with Tiffany were always tense. The party was planned for a Saturday afternoon at a nice venue we had rented, with catering and music and the whole thing. I had hired a photographer. My mom had made a beautiful cake. She's super good at that. And I was wearing a white dress that had cost me like $300 but made me feel like a princess. The party started perfect. Everyone arrived, we were toasting, taking photos, laughing, and I was literally on cloud 9 thinking, this is my day, everything is perfect. Zachary was by my side with his arm around my waist. We had just cut the cake, and I was giving a piece to my best friend when I heard the venue door slam open. And there was Tiffany, with Carter holding her hand, and she had this expression on her face that I can't even describe, like a mix of fury and satisfaction that gave me instant chills. Everyone went quiet, like that awkward silence where you know something bad is going to happen. And she walked directly to where Zachary and I were standing. What happened next was like being in a nightmare in slow motion. Tiffany pulled an envelope from her bag, one of those big manila envelopes, and screamed. And when I say screamed, I mean screamed so everyone could hear. "Chloe, I'm sorry to ruin your party, but I think you deserve to know the truth about the man you're going to marry." I froze. I couldn't process what was happening, and everyone at the party was watching this scene unfold like it was a reality show. Zachary tried to say something like, "Tiffany, what are you doing?" But she interrupted him and said, "Carter, tell Chloe who your daddy is." The kid, who was 5 years old and clearly confused, just looked at Zachary and said, "Aw, him," pointing at my fiancé. I felt like someone had hit me in the stomach with a baseball bat. I couldn't breathe, literally couldn't get air. And Tiffany continued saying she had the results of a paternity test in the envelope, that she had paid for it out of her own pocket because she deserved to know the truth, and that Zachary had been her lover years ago and was Carter's biological father. She opened the envelope and started reading the results out loud, with all those numbers and percentages that basically said Zachary had a 99.9% probability of being the father. My mom screamed something. I don't remember what. Several people took out their phones to record because, of course, this was gold for social media. And I just stood there like an idiot trying to process what I had just heard. Zachary was white, completely pale, and started saying that yes, he had a one-night stand with Tiffany like 5.5 years ago, but that he didn't know anything about Carter, that Tiffany had never told him she was pregnant, that this was the first time he was hearing that he could be the father. Tiffany laughed, like that maniacal villain laugh from movies, and said that of course he knew, that she had told him from the beginning but he ghosted her because he was a coward. Everyone was talking at the same time. My stepdad was trying to calm down my mom, who was crying, my friends didn't know whether to leave or stay, and I was still standing there with the damn piece of cake still in my hand like an idiot. I left. I just put the cake down on the nearest table, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the venue without saying a word. Zachary followed me, yelling my name. "Chloe, wait! Chloe, please let me explain." But I couldn't. I didn't want to hear him. Not at that moment. I got in my car and drove to my best friend Sarah's house, who had been at the party and ran out after me. I spent that whole night crying on her couch while she brought me tea and let me vent. The next day, Zachary showed up at Sarah's door. At, like 6 inches the morning, he looked terrible, like he hadn't slept at all, and begged me to hear him out. We sat in Sarah's car because I didn't want to be locked in with him, and Zachary told me the whole story. According to him, 5.5 years ago, before we met, he had gone to a bar with some friends and met Tiffany. She didn't tell him she was married, just that she was coming out of a complicated relationship, and they ended up going to a hotel. It was one night. A mistake. And he never saw or talked to her again. He said that when I introduced them at that first family dinner, he didn't even recognize her at first because it had been a dark night in a bar and years had passed. But later he did remember, but didn't say anything because he thought it would be super awkward. And he swore to me with tears in his eyes, that he never knew anything about Carter, that Tiffany never contacted him to tell him she was pregnant. I didn't know what to believe. On one hand, Zachary's story made sense, but on the other hand, how is it possible that Tiffany never told him anything? Like, if you're pregnant after a one-night stand, the normal thing is to contact the guy, right? But then I remembered how Tiffany had acted weird when she met Zachary. And I started thinking that maybe she did recognize him but didn't say anything because she was still married to Peter and needed him to think Carter was his son. Which, if true, is super twisted and basically means Tiffany had been committing fraud for years. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about the legal implications. I was just trying to process that my fiancé had a child with my stepsister. I told Zachary I needed time, that I couldn't see him for a while, and he accepted even though he looked devastated. I stayed at Sarah's house for a few days, turned off my phone because everyone was calling me, my mom, my stepdad, even Tiffany had the audacity to try to contact me, and tried to think about what to do. Sarah suggested I contact Peter, Tiffany's ex. Because if Zachary was Carter's father, then Peter had been paying child support for a child that wasn't his, which is fraud, and he deserved to know. At first, I didn't want to get more involved in this mess, but then I thought Peter was a victim in all of this as much as I was. So I looked up his number on Facebook and sent him a message explaining what had happened. Peter responded almost immediately and was in shock. He told me he had always had doubts about whether Carter was really his son because the kid didn't look anything like him, but that Tiffany had sworn to him she hadn't been with anyone else, and he believed her because, well, because they were married, and you're supposed to trust your wife. I sent him photos of the paternity test results that Tiffany had shown at the party. Someone had uploaded them to Facebook. Obviously, because my humiliation needed to be public, and Peter said he was going to get his own paternity test to confirm that he was not the father. And he did, like he went the next day with Carter and got tested. And 2 weeks later, the results came confirming that he indeed had no biological relationship with the child. Peter sued Tiffany for paternity fraud and to get back all the child support he had paid over the years, which was like thousands and thousands of dollars. And that's when things got even crazier, because during the legal investigation, it came to light that Tiffany had not only been defrauding Peter, but she had also been collecting child support from another guy, some guy named Jeremy who wasn't Carter's father either. Yes, you read that right. This woman had convinced 2 different men that they were her son's father and was collecting child support from both simultaneously. It's like, who does that? Who is capable of maintaining a lie like that for years without feeling guilt? While all this was exploding legally, Zachary kept begging me to talk. I had gone back to our apartment. Technically, it was both of ours, but I paid most of the rent. But I told him he needed to get another paternity test, because I wasn't going to trust just the one Tiffany had brought to the party. He agreed, and we went together to a certified lab to get tested. The process was awkward and silent. I was there with my arms crossed while they drew his blood, and all I could think was, how did we get here? How did my perfect life turn into this mess in a matter of hours? The results took like a week, and each day that passed, I got more anxious because part of me still hoped it was all a mistake, that Tiffany's test had been wrong and Zachary wasn't the father. But no. The results came back and confirmed the same thing. 99.9% probability of paternity. Zachary was definitely Carter's father. There was no way to deny it. I locked myself in the bedroom and cried for hours, like that ugly crying where you can't stop and your chest hurts. Sarah came and stayed with me. And my mom? I also tried to visit, but I didn't want to see anyone from my family because I was too angry. How was it possible that Tiffany had done this? And why did she wait until my engagement party to reveal it? Couldn't she have said it before, privately, like a normal person? But then I realized that Tiffany never did anything normally. She always needed to be the center of attention. And ruining my party gave her exactly that. I told Zachary I was going to stay at Sarah's for a while I decided what to do with our relationship. He begged me not to break up, that we could go to couples therapy, that he didn't know anything about Carter and it wasn't his fault. And technically, he was right, but I couldn't separate my feelings from the fact that now there was a child involved, a child who was his legal and biological responsibility. We tried therapy. We went to like 3 sessions, and the therapist basically told us we needed to rebuild trust from scratch, because even though Zachary hadn't known about Carter, the fact that he had a child with my stepsister was something I needed to process. Everything got even more complicated when Child Protective Services got involved. Because during the legal investigation, it came out that Tiffany had been using the child support money for her personal expenses instead of for Carter, and there was evidence that the child wasn't receiving appropriate care. Like, CPS went to her house and found there wasn't enough food, that the apartment was dirty, basically signs of neglect. They removed custody temporarily, and guess who ended up taking care of Carter? My parents. My mom and stepdad offered themselves as temporary caregivers while all the legal stuff was being resolved, which meant that every time I went to their house to try to fix my relationship with them, Carter was there, the living reminder of Zachary's betrayal. And that's where things reached another level of crazy. Because one afternoon, like 2 months after the party, I was in the apartment alone. Zachary had gone out to buy something when Tiffany knocked on the door. I didn't even know how she had gotten my address. But there she was, with that victim expression she always put on when she wanted to manipulate someone. I opened the door but didn't let her in. I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed and asked her what she wanted. She started with a speech about how I didn't understand her situation, that she had tried to do the right thing, that Zachary had ruined her life, and I interrupted her and told her to leave before I called the police. But then she dropped the bomb. She said, "Zachary is lying. He knew about Carter from the beginning. I told him when I was pregnant and he told me it wasn't his problem." I froze. I asked her if she had proof of that, and she said she had messages from years ago where he basically told her to get lost. I didn't know whether to believe her because Tiffany had lied about literally everything up to this point, but something in her voice, in how she said it, made me doubt. I told her to show me the messages, and she said she had them on her old phone that was in storage, that she could bring them in a few days. When Zachary got home like 20 minutes later, I told him about Tiffany's visit and what she had said. And there, in that moment, I saw something on his face that confirmed my worst fears. He turned pale, sat down on the couch with his head in his hands, and after what seemed like an eternity said, "I need to tell you something. It turns out Tiffany was right. At least partially. Zachary did know about Carter. Not since the pregnancy, like she said, but for years. Remember that first family dinner when I introduced him? Well, after that dinner, Tiffany contacted him on Facebook and told him that Carter was his son and that they needed to talk. Zachary panicked, didn't know what to do, and basically ghosted her completely, blocked her number, deleted his Facebook, everything, to avoid dealing with the situation. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process that Zachary had lied to me for years. Not just about the one-night stand, which, okay, that happened before we met and technically he didn't owe me that information, but about the fact that he knew he had a son and decided to ignore it. I asked him why he hadn't told me anything when we got engaged, when we were planning our life together, and he just said he was afraid of losing me, that he thought if he ignored the problem enough it would just disappear. I just stood there looking at him and thinking, who is this man? Because he clearly wasn't the person I thought I knew. I gave him back the ring right then and there. I took it off my finger and put it in his hand while telling him our engagement was canceled. He tried to convince me we could fix it, that he was going to take responsibility for Carter now, that we could be a family, and I told him no, that I couldn't build a life with someone who had lied to me, so, fundamentally. I packed my things that same night. Sarah came with her truck to help me move the boxes, and I left that apartment knowing I was never going back. The next few months were a legal and emotional disaster. Peter won his lawsuit against Tiffany, and the judge ordered her to pay back all the child support she had fraudulently received, plus interest, which was like $45,000. Jeremy, the other guy who had been paying, also sued and won another similar amount. Tiffany obviously didn't have that money because she had spent it all on who knows what. So the judge established a payment plan and ordered her to do community service. But the most important part legally was Carter's custody. The child couldn't stay with Tiffany for obvious reasons. Zachary, we now knew, was the biological father, but he had never had a relationship with the child, and the judge considered it would be traumatic for Carter to be handed over to a stranger, and Peter obviously no longer had any rights. In the end, super ironically, Jeremy, the other guy Tiffany had defrauded, asked for custody of Carter. It turns out he had been raising the child for years, thinking he was his son. Carter called him dad, and although there was no biological connection, there was a real emotional and legal connection. The judge determined that what was best for Carter was to stay with Jeremy, who had proven to be a capable and caring father, and Tiffany lost practically all her visitation rights. Zachary, after much deliberation and with the help of a lawyer, decided not to fight for custody because he recognized that he had never been part of Carter's life and that forcing a relationship would only hurt the child. Tiffany was sentenced to a year of probation plus community service and restitution payments. Basically, her life was ruined. And honestly, I can't say I feel much pity, because all of this was a direct consequence of her own decisions and lies. My mom and stepdad were devastated by everything that happened. My mom felt guilty for not having seen the signs that Tiffany was manipulating everyone, and I tried to maintain a relationship with them, but I needed space from everything that had happened. As for Zachary, I haven't spoken to him since I moved out. I blocked his number, his social media, everything. I heard through Sarah, who still has mutual friends with him, that he moved to another city to start over, and I hope he learned something from this whole mess. I don't hate him, honestly, but I also can't forgive him for lying to me like that. Sometimes I wonder if I would have reacted differently if he had told me the truth from the beginning, when Tiffany contacted him, but I guess we'll never know. Now, 6 months after everything exploded, I'm living alone in a small apartment on the other side of the city. I went back to therapy, this time alone, to process everything that happened and rebuild my life. I left my previous job because too many people there knew about the drama, and I couldn't stand the pitying looks, and I got a new position at another company where nobody knows my story. I have limited contact with my family, I talk to my mom like once a month, and I've started going out with friends again, although I'm not ready for anything romantic. Sometimes I think about this whole story and it seems unreal, like it happened to someone else. The Chloe from a year ago had a completely different life, was excited about her wedding, thought she had everything figured out, and now I'm here basically starting from scratch at 27. But there are also days where I feel relieved, because even though it was devastating, it also saved me from marrying someone who clearly wasn't who I thought he was. And that, I guess, is something good in the long run. Last week, my mom called to say that Tiffany had tried to contact her, asking for forgiveness and wanting to rebuild the family, and I told her to do whatever she wanted but not to involve me in it. I have no interest in having a relationship with Tiffany. I probably never will. And I'm at peace with that decision. Carter is doing well with Jeremy from what I know, and I'm glad that at least the child ended up with someone who truly loves him and cares for him, because he was the real innocent victim in this whole mess. And me? I'm surviving. Some days are better than others. Some days I still wake up and think about everything I lost. But I'm here. I'm working on myself. And that's enough for now.